All right, what's going on? Let's get this thing started. All right. Where is my that? Good. Okay. Bring that over here. All right. So let's do a mic check. Can someone in chat let me know that you are in fact hearing me? That would be lovely. We've got about 8 second delay or something like that going right now. I'm gonna see if I can make the camera a little bit better. Let's see. Okay. Better. Okay, configure video, autofocus, I guess so. Alright, can hear, very good. Okay, so let's start. Alright, so as people start crawling, oh god, there goes the autofocus. Hold on, I gotta fix the focus. I'm not doing it. We're not doing autofocus. That already failed. Hold on. Hold on. Camera control. It's not on autofocus. Oh, yes, it is on autofocus. Yeah, we'll stop that right there. Okay. All right, cool. All right, so we're going to start with looking at just an analysis of the tests itself. I'm going to show you some things to keep in mind as we sort of talk about the test and what to go over. Obviously, in an hour, we're not going to be able to do every last thing on planet Earth. That's not the goal tonight. The goal tonight is twofold. One, give you a sensible direction to study, right? Something that you can look at and go, okay, that's a plan. And a plan that's based in reality. So I'm going to help you with that too. Second, we're going to break down the test itself really quick. I want to get this all done in the first 10 minutes. What the sections are, what you're going to run into, how to do it, etc. And then finally, third, is to look at what I think are some of the early topics that are almost certainly going to appear on the exam. All right, so let's do that. All right, hopefully I got the right things in the right screens. Not really. Hold on. Hold on. Why is this screen so small? All right, boom. That's better-ish. Sorry, I should have been set up earlier. And then where am... Oh, that's because I'm not in the corner. Hang on. That's better. Okay. So, what is behind me? And I don't mean behind me. I mean behind me on the screen. What is behind me is an AI analysis I did about 30 minutes ago on the last basically 4 exams given. So it's 2024 to 2025. We have to keep in mind there are 2 tests a year, right? There's 3. There's a January, June, and an August. So I went back several different years here. Sorry. I went back several different years. And I told the AI, and this is like how AI should be used to your benefit, not to cheat like you guys use it to do, but to actually take the hard work of learning data, finding data, and helping it to make your life easier. So, what we have here is a breakdown by question of topics by section. So, we're going to look at these sections, we're going to look at the topics, explain everything that's come up, and go from there. Again, I'm pretty good at using AI for this type of work, so you can trust this analysis. I went through it myself. I made sure it made sense. I double and triple checked it. I had to add more levels of complexity as I went along. So it's something I think you can. I heard rumors of a pizza party for world. Macro is on top. Did I send a message to Macro? Nope. No. Macro, you don't get nothing. Sorry. Incentives matter. Okay, so this analysis is broken down by the multiple choice section, the CRQ section, and then finally the enduring issue. Now, the enduring issue section we'll talk about because that's a little complicated, right? Even for AI. The question's always the same, so do keep that in mind. First off, notice that for the last 4 years, these are the things that have appeared on the multiple choice. Now, they're doing this in roughly order, not in frequency. So in other words, Enlightenment thinkers and political revolutions are the first things that show up. And you can see for yourself. Not always, but often, question 3, question 4 to 5, question 1 to 2. Industrial and agricultural revolutions, questions 1 and 2, questions 3. And on it goes. So if there is a particular topic and you're like, man, I don't know that topic, these are the questions you should be practicing. Now, I want to warn you, just because there's a question on a topic does not mean it's asking the content of that topic. You do have to be kind of sensible about this. Some of the questions are able to be answered just from reading the document, and we're going to demonstrate that as well tonight. So, you could read. You don't need me to read at you. So you can see for yourself what topics show up on the multiple choice. Now, if I scroll down just a little bit, you'll be able to see what topics show up on the constructed response to CRQ. Now, I have some thoughts on the CRQ. I will cover them in a moment. But these are not really topics, right? This is the skills. I asked to find the skills that are used, like how they ask you to do it. And cause and effect is a huge part of it. Context is a huge part of it. The type of sources, being political cartoons and charts, is a huge part of it. These are challenging documents. I know a lot of students think the pictures are easier. Pictures are not easier. Pictures are much, much more complicated. So you do have to be kind of careful about that, all right? Please try to be careful about that as we go through. Again, this is for your own benefit. FYI, I will upload this document to my Google Classrooms, and then I'll make sure Mr. Mann gets it as well, and I'll make sure Mr. Smeraldo gets it as well. Very likely they've given you stuff that's already just as good, but if you want an actual deep sort of research, scientific analysis of what's in this test year on year on year, and I don't want to go back too many years because the test has changed a lot over the last few years, so I went back a few, and that were a few exams anyway, and that's a good indication of the trend they're on. So if these are the things they're testing over the last few years, odds are extremely good. These are the things they'll be testing over the next few years. All right, so and then enduring issues, again, is you really can't do much with this part. You know, the AI's attempt to sort of give an analysis, but the reality is you're choosing the document. You know, you're choosing the topic by selecting an enduring issue. So we're focused in on multiple choice tonight with a little bit of a sort of a sidebar into the CRQ and a warning I want to give you about it because I think it's critical. All right, so that's enough of that for now. Let's go ahead and get into the actual exam. And here we are. Okay, so first order of business, right? Your test. Your test is 3 hours. You do not need 3 hours to complete this test. You do not. But let me give you some very wise advice. Just because you can finish in an hour and a half does not mean you should get up in an hour and a half. Let me be blunt with you. The students who get up first do the worst. That is a cold stone fact. If you're the first butt out of the seat, if you're up there sitting there with 20 minutes to go, staring around the room, wondering when and how you're going to get to leave, grow up. You have the ability to write an unlimited amount on your essay. The more accurate material you add to that essay, the higher your grade will be. I cannot stress enough how difficult it is to score well on this exam. Let me be blunt with you. This is not math. You don't get 30% of the questions right and suddenly that's a 65. That's not really the case. There really is no curve on this test. You get what you get. You want a 90 on the test, you got to kind of get 90% of the material right, combining the multiple choice with your essay work. And it's very difficult to do that. It's very difficult to do that. Even for the top students. Passing the test, all right, look, it's not splitting atoms, but it's not easy. Let me also be blunt with you. The test that most stops students from graduating in New York State is this one. That's been known for 20 years. It is the Regents, because not all Regents are required, right? Not like physics or something. But of the required Regents exams, this is the hardest one. By a long shot. The numbers are clear. They're there. They are what they are. Why? Because the material is so diverse. You're covering the entire world. You know, like that's a simple task. So you got to focus it on the things that are going to help you pass. So let's go through the sections. Make sure everybody knows what you're expecting here. First off, and this is just me kind of skimming down quickly. There are 28 multiple choice. There are always 28 multiple choice. It's an odd number, but that's the number. There are 28. All of your multiple choice, in case this is not clear to you, all of your multiple choice will be in the form of a document and one, two, or not one probably, but 2 to 3 questions per document. As you can see here, and I don't know, this is last June's exam. You can see that in almost all cases, it's 2 questions per document, 2 questions per document. It seems like that's exactly what it was every single time. Okay, so 2 questions per document. So that does mean that, you have to read the document, understand the document, and be able to interpret the document at the very minimum. Once you get past those 28 questions, oh, another thing that may not be obvious. There is nobody monitoring your section by section time allotments. You get the test in one bulk. It's one package. You go ahead and answer it in whatever order you want and whatever time you want. If you want to start on the essay, start on the essay. It's no problem at all. Some students like to do that. Some students don't like to do that. I say most students don't like to do that. It's up to you. It's no big deal. You can do it whatever way you want to do it. Now, the CRQ. The CRQ, I'm going to be blunt with you, doesn't usually present a major challenge, with the exception of one thing. So each section of the CRQ, you're going to get two sets, right? A CRQ set 1, CRQ set 2. Each of them is going to have a context question, a sourcing question, and then a question that tests, do you understand or can you identify a particular relationship between the documents? You don't get a choice as to what those relationships are. They'll tell you. It'll be like cause and effect or turning points or something like that. When it comes to context, there are two basic options. You could be asked about historical context, what they'll call historical circumstances, which is what is basically the background of the issue. So you have a painting here. This painting is the storming of the Bastille. It's a pretty famous image. Everybody's seen it in the course, whether you remember it or not. What led to that? That's not in the document. That's nowhere in the document. The document cannot help you get this right. Explaining what led to the storming of the Bastille is not in this document. That is background. You have to provide a background. Now, the attack on Bastille prison in Paris is seen by many as the first major violent event of the French Revolution. That's a hell of a hint. They're telling you, okay, it's part of the French Revolution. It was the first major violent event of the French Revolution. So what happened that led to a violent event? Like they're trying to get you there. But in the end, you get yourself there. So there is no information in this document that's going to help you answer the question. You just need to know. So keep that in mind. Can you answer this question on the line available here? The answer is yes, you can. But hold that thought. CRQ question 2. Here's a document. This one is basically, can you explain something about the document itself? The second question in the CRQ set is going to be about the document. It's about the source. In this case, it's a point of view question. Point of view questions are effectively, what does this author believe? All right, what do they believe? It's the author's point of view. It's not what's right. It's not what's historically accurate. If the author believes that Martians made the pyramids, then you tell us that Martians made the pyramids, what this author believes. If they're asking you point of view, they could ask you other things as well. They could say, for example, the argument presented here could most likely be used to justify what sort of political action or something like that. Depends on the question. The third, again, can you answer it in the line provided? If you write, and you have to handwrite this test, if you handwrite this information that you need, the answer you need into this line, is there sufficient space here? The answer is yes. That is not true with the third question. Both sets of CRQs will have a third question. This third question, okay, remove, and we ban, and that's that. And hold on 1 second. We report this person for hate speech. Sure, why not? That's a good one. Hide user on my channel, and they're gone. Okay, no more of that person. So, anyway, so cause and effect in this particular case. It could be turning point, whatever it might be. This space here, in my opinion, is nowhere near enough. You cannot actually complete this answer accurately and effectively in the space provided. You have to do two answers. You have to identify and explain. That is not one thing. You have to tell me. Identify is to state the answer, right? Identify, in this case, a cause and effect relationship. So how do you do that? You have to say what the cause is and say how it created an effect. You have to say that. Well, that right there is at least a line and a half to 2 lines. I mean, how small do you think you write? And then on top of that, the next thing is explain. Because it's not enough to just state it. explain, which means tell me how or why the items in these documents are a cause and an effect of one another. That's not getting done in that space. I could not write that answer in that space. So I'm telling you now, when it comes to the third question of each of the CRQ sets, you absolutely do want to make sure that you are going beyond this line. Just keep writing down in the blank. That blank space is there for a reason. I do not know why they have stopped giving you lines, and it's only this what they give you. I am telling you now, most students who lose CRQ points lose it on the third question of each set. It's not because they're dumb. It's not because they don't answer the question. It's because they're led to believe that this line is some sort of limitation and they should be able to answer the question in that space. I do not think that's a thing. In fact, if you look at the answer keys, I can do that for you actually. I'll show you what I mean by this. If my voice fades when I turn away, it's because my microphone's right here. Alright, so if I go and look at the Regents real quick, and I'll show you exactly what I mean by this. So if this is the June 2024, and I look at the answer key for this question, here's the answer keys, right? So if I go to CRQ, so this is question 31, right? Here we go. Identify and explain. So let's look at one of the answers they think is okay. Look at this answer. Look at that answer. Doesn't matter what it's, in fact, I'm sorry, I went a little too far. I do not think any student could write that information, handwrite it, and fit it in the space they gave you. I think that's true of several of these. And by the way, these are very, very, very specific, and they're not even written in a way that's meant to sort of represent actual student writing. So you need to be very careful about that. I'm telling you now, go beyond that line set. When it comes to the third question of each set, this question is going to require you to use both documents. Write more than the document lines provide you. Write more than the space provided. Just keep writing down here. We do grade it. That's fine. All right. So absolutely do that. It's in your interest. I don't know how else to say it. Just do it. I've graded these for only 20-something years. Please do this. Go beyond these lines. Because you cannot afford to lose these points. I'm being honest with you. You just can't. Because these points are critical. When it comes to figuring out your grade, you need to get down the chart. I'm sure all your teachers have shown you the chart. I'll show you the chart one more time, and then we're going to get into some actual content. When you go and look at the actual chart, here's the chart. I'm assuming everybody has seen this by now, and if you haven't, well, then welcome to me being the first. This left-hand column is the total of your multiple choice and CRQ grade, right? So 28 stops here. That's if you got 28 points, let's just say you got all the multiple choice right, it stops there. The rest are all document points. Look at the difference. If you were to get 2 of the CRQs wrong, it's a massive difference. Like, say you had a total of 26, but you got a CRQ wrong. You just failed. You went from a 66 to a 64, a 66 to a 63, and on it goes, depending on your essay score. So you really got to be careful with that, all right? And again, for those of you who are looking, I remind the entirety of you, this is 12% of your year's grade. 12%. That is a massive number of the year's grade. This one test is worth, in effect, half a quarter. Slightly more than half a quarter, actually, worth of grades. It's enormously important. So do yourself a massive favor, and try to get as high as you can on this test. And the way you do that is to take the elements in your control, namely the writing, the CRQs and the essay, and push the envelope on those. You can't control the multiple choice, but you can control what you write. And as you can see, there are very few boxes on here that have 90s or better. Very, 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 very few. So I can't tell you enough. It's going to be difficult. Please make sure you keep this in mind as you're studying. I'm just glancing over to the chat from time to time to see if, in fact, let me pop this thing out. Pop out the chat. Put it over here. That's better. Okay. There is no curve. You can forget the curve. There's no curve. Okay? Just telling you right now. There's no curve. The curve is not a thing. If you actually do the numbers, you'll find, like I just said, there's no curve. Whoever you guys, what's a curve? There's no curve in this test. This is basically a matrix that shows you if you get about 65% of the material right, you're going to get about 65 in the test. Just take my word for it. Don't even worry about this chart. All you need to know is you got to do as well as possible. Okay? Next, let's go into some actual content then. All right? Because we've looked at the actual structure of the test. Let's go into some actual content. The content I want to cover today is going to be a look at, and I'm just going to open up a Google Doc for this purpose, and then I will share that Google Doc out with you guys. Let's see. through the same means I mentioned before. I'll put it on my Google Classroom and I'll put it on everything else. Okay, so let's go. All right, so what do I want to discuss today? Well, let's go ahead and turn this thing into a landscape mode to make it a little bit easier to read. Let's up the view. Yo, Big Daddy Drew M. Okay. So, I think one of the things I want to cover is the early parts of the exam. Get you off to a good start. What are the things that are going to show up on this test? First order of business, there is going to be right off the bat the Enlightenment versus absolutism. Now, this topic will be there. So, Enlightenment thinking versus absolute monarchy. Another thing you get is a comparison of what we're going to call absolute systems of governance. And you typically see this in a France versus Japan thing. Now, when I say France versus Japan, I mean specifically the France of Louis XIV versus the Japan of Tokugawa Ieyasu, or the Tokugawa shogunate. So we're going to go through both of those today a little bit. Me and Mr. Mann were talking about this afternoon, and we both agree that this particular comparative shows up quite a bit. All right, so, and that probably will take us till the rest of the 40 minutes of the stream. So let's get to it. Let's start with the second one first. So absolute systems of government. Absolute system of government comes with a few different flavors, but basically it's going to look like this. So what does it mean to have absolute power? Well, absolute power is itself a little bit of it's kind of a tricky idea. In Europe, it means a particular thing. In Europe, what you're looking at is a system where monarchs have managed to reduce or remove the power of their nobles. Now, this is a critical piece. All right, so hear me out here. It is unusual. Okay, I'm just going up and reading what you guys are putting in and stuff that you want to go through a little bit over here. That's fine. We can go through some of that stuff. All right, so monarchs manage. It's. Let me go back to my thought. It's very unusual that kings have power. Like, it sounds like they do. They're kings, right? They should be powerful, but often they're not, because they relied upon a whole group of rich aristocrats to bring them to power. If you think about it, there really isn't much difference between that in those days and like major corporations funding political campaigns today. It's very similar. You have very rich, powerful, and influential people who use their wealth, and in some cases their military might in the ancient world, in the medieval world as well, to bring a particular one of them to the power of becoming a king. So it raises them to that frame of king. Once the person is made into a king, you often get a feudal system. In a feudal system, you have a bond of loyalty of some kind. Usually a bond that's not like, oh, I'm loyal to you because I love you. It's usually a bond of, I'm loyal to you because you're going to make me rich and powerful. And I'm only supporting you as long as that's true. The problem is, any king only has so much power and wealth, right? And as the generations go on, they have to shrink their own personal power and wealth and distribute it out to everybody else in their society who are rich and noble to keep them loyal. That's a zero-sum game. You're not going to win that. The kings are eventually going to get to the point where they're so weak, they no longer have anything left to give away to maintain loyalty. And that's when you start to get infighting. So what kings will start to do is they'll start to encourage various different peoples to, nobles to say, okay, I'll support you, oh noble, against that noble over there, even though they're both my vassals. Go ahead. You beat him up and take his stuff because I got nothing left to give you, and I'll support you in that. This kind of game is dangerous because basically it's going to lead one day to the king losing all their power, getting overthrown, and getting replaced. That pattern defines most of world history in places that have kings. There are some places that manage to overcome that, usually with a complex bureaucracy that runs the system, and the system itself is perpetuating. And the aristocrats and the nobles, the wealthy landlords of society, are bypassed in some way by this by this bureaucratic system. A lot of those are not on the test. Ancient China, ancient Rome, ancient Persia, they're not on the test, so you don't have to worry about those. So what does it look like when Europeans start to do this for the first real time, Western Europeans? Well, it looks like the absolute monarchy of Louis XIV. Now, if we use Louis XIV and his government of France, it's got a couple of things going for it that makes him have all this power. First off, by the time he comes to power, there's already been a pattern of reducing the power of the nobilities. So, systematic reduction of noble power. All right. Okay. Systematic reduction of noble power. That's a big part of this. So nobles lose their power over time because the kings are starting to chip away at it. Now, how do they do that? They do that by hiring skilled individuals to do the tasks nobles used to do. This includes things like tax collection. This includes things like public records. This includes things like military service. This includes things like finances. So, in other words, rather than relying upon your nobles to do all this stuff on a local level, the kings will begin to start hiring people. Where do these people come from? This is going to be important. Hiring who? Usually the emerging middle class. Because these middle class folk are in a unique position. They're educated, they're thoughtful, they're hungry, and they don't have privileges. They don't have power. They might have money, but they don't have power. Those are separate issues in the medieval world. You might have money, but it's not money that gives you political power. It's your birthright that gives you political power. And so you can certainly buy your way into power if systems allow you to. Or your education can get you access to power if systems allow you to. So what some of these kings do, and Louis XIV is the inheritor of the beginning of this, but he is definitely the man who crystallizes this idea, is he puts together a system where nobles are going to take apart or going to lose their power as he starts to hire people to do these jobs. So basically you get a bureaucracy. And I spelled that wrong. Bureaucracy. And I tried. A bureaucracy. Now in a bureaucracy, what do you have? You have a series of government agencies that oversee all government functions. So that's a bureaucracy. America has a bureaucracy. Most modern nations have a bureaucracy. Medieval states typically didn't. Nations that have bureaucracies almost always last much longer than nations that don't. When nations rely upon the skill and capability of individuals is typically when things fall apart much faster. Because all it takes is one dummy to ruin everything. That's all it takes. But when you have systems in place, and bureaucracies are systems, you don't really need the best performing person. You need a self-sustaining system. Now, this can lead to problems and stagnation over time and corruption and a system falling apart, for sure. And it does predictably everywhere eventually. But often these systems do sustain for a long period of time. And if you do have a very dynamic leader on the top, for example, if you do have a capable hegemon. Hegemon's a fancy term for a king, ruler, whatever title you want to give them. If you have a capable hegemon on top of the system, that person can really make a bureaucracy work well for them. Now, this can be very dangerous. You can get a system like Stalinism in the Soviet Union, which has a complex, communism almost always has a very complex bureaucracy, but it's totally tilted to support the ruling class of the Communist Party or the individual ruler at the head of the Communist Party, a Stalin, a Mao, or whoever it might be. So bureaucracy can absolutely be used as a way to sustain the power of the system. But I bring you to Machiavelli. Machiavelli, who famously said, it's the duty of a ruler to avoid chaos. That chaos is terrifying. It's terrible. It's awful. Better people be ruled by a tyrant than to be ruled by a clown. Because yes, tyrants are awful, but the chaos of disorder and disunity and civil war and civil strife and anarchy is worse than any dictator you could have. Now, whether you agree with that or not, that is certainly a thing that is at least manifested from time to time when you've had a breakdown of order. So bureaucracies are all about the maintenance of order and the consolidation of power, the centralization of power. Get used to that word. Centralization of power. And that's also the same thing as saying a centralization of government. Same exact thing. Which is to say power flows towards the top of government and stays there. And it's under the will of the king, the ruler of the bureaucracy, who actually gets the power. And this also meant, for example, that these bureaucrats, these skilled individuals, right? These guys over here, all of them would be working for salaries. These would people being getting paid by government. That was not new for nobles. Nobles didn't do that. You know, they weren't paid by government. It was the opposite. The government extracted from them services, and they paid them in those services. That wasn't in wealth. This is the opposite situation. Your wealth as a member of the government depends upon you doing a good enough job that you please your superiors and you maintain your salary. Your birthright doesn't give you access to these things necessarily. And Louis XIV was an absolute master at this. The other thing he does, and this is a critical piece, is that he uses Versailles. Now, Versailles is his very famous palace on the outskirts of Paris. I've been there myself. And it was built as like this mousetrap meant to trap the nobility of France there on the grounds of Versailles, unwilling to leave, as Louis XIV used it as a way to sort of sucker them into a political game where they're competing with each other for favors in the court. In other words, trying to get Louis's approval. And why Louis did this was quite simple. He wanted his nobles neutered and under his control, directly visually under his control. And as long as these nobles were in Versailles bickering with each other for Louis's little crumbs, they weren't back at home, they weren't on their lands, they weren't plotting against the king. They weren't conspiring to overthrow him. He had them well in hand. They had him well controlled. And Versailles did this. And Versailles did this in a way that I'm going to call was fairly subtle. I would say a subtle manipulation and neutering of noble power and ambition. And it worked very well. Very, 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 very well. I spelled neutering wrong there. Sorry, I'll fix that. Now, another leader of another state who did something rather similar is all the way over in Japan. So let's get out of here and let's go to Japan. Now, we use Japan as a comparative point for two reasons. One, this is happening at roughly the same time Louis is ruling, so it's similar-ish time frame, 1600s. And then on top of that, you get a kind of similar system where an aristocratic nobility must be, sort of reined in by a ruling monarch. Now, in this particular case, the ruler in question is a guy named Tokugawa Ieyasu. Now, keep in mind, in East Asia, family names come first. So if we're going to say Louis the 14th of the line of the House of Bourbon, his last name was Bourbon, the Bourbon family. Tokugawa Ieyasu is actually his first name. It's like Louis Ieyasu. And then Tokugawa is his family name. But most people just call him Tokugawa, and we refer to the government as the Tokugawa shogunate. So the Tokugawa shogunate is different than every other previous shogunate in Japan. So we should understand a little bit about Japan's social system before we get too much into this. First off, Japan's social system famously had a group of warrior aristocrats, not altogether that different from Europe in the medieval era. Now, in the case of Japan, these are called the samurai. Now, the samurai were actually all aristocrats. All the aristocrats of warrior rank and above. This included the lords as well. We're all part of the samurai class. It's like calling, it'd be like in Europe saying all the non-commoners. Okay, so the knights, the lords, the dukes, etc., all the way up the chain, they would all be considered part of the aristocratic class. So samurai is just a name that's given to the aristocratic class of Japan. Now, the samurai in Japan for centuries had engaged in consistent civil war between clans. And this is not, again, all that different than what happened in most of medieval Europe, where this lord would war on that lord with the soft permission of the king of whatever country, call it France, letting them do so. Well, the same thing happened in Japan. This clan would war with that clan with the soft permission of the shogun on top, who didn't have any real ability to stop them. Now, Tokugawa is going to change all that, but for previous shogunates, that had been true. So, and you have this kind of similar-ish problem where in both medieval Europe, France being our example, and in medieval Japan, you had the aristocratic warrior nobility really running their own affairs and the rulership having very limited control over what they could actually do to these people. Now, how does Ieyasu use a system quite similar here? Well, for one, he gets power. So let's go back to sort of his own situation. So the Tokugawa shogunate, all right, begins, or I guess I'll put begins, with a victory over its enemies to end a civil war. In effect, Tokugawa defeated an alliance of other lords allied to a different house and won. having won that war, he secures control of the country. So far, nothing here particularly unique. One aristocrat rising above his fellows, defeating them in combat, and claiming a title like king. Shogun is basically king. Claiming a title like king is not unique, not different, not particularly interesting, frankly. It's kind of pretty boring as these things go. So what then makes it something we should really pay attention to? Well, it's everything Tokugawa does from that point forward. That is different than everything that happened previously in Japanese history. And here is where the system, the similarities to Lewis's rule come in. For one, whereas Lewis had Versailles, Tokugawa had the city of Edo. Now, Edo is modern is the ancient name of modern day Tokyo. Okay, don't mind me, I'm getting a drink. And Edo was his capital. It was a newly built capital city. So while it wasn't exactly like a massive palace like Versailles, nevertheless, it was a brand new capital city. Similar to Versailles, although the methodology is a little bit different, Tokugawa had a hostage system. Now, his hostage system was rather clever. His samurai lords had to spend 6 months out of the year in Edo, physically in Edo by law, by decree. The other 6 months, they had to leave the heir of their clan, the heir of their household. That was the rules. So, this hostage system ensured that nobles were under the direct physical control of the shogun. This is critical stuff, right? Because it's very much like Versailles in its function. Here's the deal, right? If you're a noble and you're sitting in the gardens of Versailles, you don't have any ability to plot, plan, or do anything against the king because you're not at home. This is not an era of Snapchat, Instagram, Instasnap, whatever. Talk your tick. It's not an era, right? It's not a thing that happens at that time. So you have to be physically at home to do the things of running your household. This is true in Versailles. Well, in Versailles, the reason nobles stayed there was because to leave was to lose the favor of Louis. And if you lost Louis's favor, you would be out of the court's social circles. Anybody who were to, say, for example, stay your friend or stay on your side or stay allied to you, they would also become a shamed member of the court. They would not get promotions. Their family would not be chosen for important positions. Their daughters would not get a chance to serve in the court of Louis. And on and on and on it went. So you didn't want to mess up because it would basically blacklist you from the noble society around you if you upset Louis. And this was something Louis had put together particularly for this purpose. In the case of Tokugawa, it's a little bit more heavy-handed. It's flat out a threat. You will stay here. Because if you F around, you find out. Do something stupid when your children are with me, and I'll have your children executed. Do something stupid, or your children do something stupid, and a lot of these children have been grown adults. Your children do something stupid when you are in Edo, I'll execute you. And like the threat's very clear. Like Tokugawa makes no sort of bones to hide this feature. You know, he came to power by war. He's a warrior ruler, and his descendants will keep this policy going. And as a result, again, look for comparison, right? A comparison here is just like in France. This effectively reduced the power of the Japanese nobility, which is that samurai class. Very effective in doing so. In addition, Tokugawa will start to emphasize non-warrior arts. And this becomes a thing that Louis will do as well. So you'll start to see things like French nobility begin to put a very great emphasis on style, clothing, fashion. All things Louis himself promoted. If Louis wanted to start a fashion trend, he'd wear something into court, and all of a sudden everybody wants to wear a similar garment. Or, is there a curve? Okay, Braden, read up. And on this went, like throughout the various different elements of court. I mean, Louis even had a thing where people would compete to put his socks on for him. Like, this was a job of the court. There were people in Louis's court who held his chamber pot. If you don't know what that means, that's the pot he pees in when he wakes up. So literally there was a member of the nobility. This would be like having the President of the United States getting Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk or Bill Gates or name your rich person, to compete with each other for the right to hold the pot the president will pee in when he wakes up every morning. That's the level of control Lewis had over the most powerful people of society. They're competing for a job that is so low and so demeaning. And nevertheless, they all want this job because they see it as an essential to their own eventual future success. And if you didn't get Lewis's favor, well, then you fell out of favor. And if you fell out of favor, people ignored you. You fell down the social ladder in a quite real way. Tokugawa didn't exactly do that, but he did start to put a lot more patronage into other samurai arts, things that were not warfare. So, for example, poetry, painting, soft arts, soft disciplines, things that ensured that these warriors were focusing on things that were not exactly war anymore. And it got to the point where a great many samurai, despite the fact they're carrying around 2 swords everywhere they go, a great many of them, under the latter years of the Tokugawa shogunate, had no idea how to actually wield them. They had never trained in their swords. They wore them, as like a showpiece. Like, oh, I'm wearing this because it's my noble right to wear this. Okay, do you know how to fight with those things? Well, no, not really. I spent all my time, painting and studying poetry and staring at cherry blossoms. Tokugawa was quite happy to see his nobles do that because, again, it meant they weren't preparing for war. So this idea of distracting your nobles and keeping them weak and keeping them under control was a feature of an absolute style of government. Something that happened under France, something that happened in Japan. Now, the responses to this style of government very different in both places. So now we're going back to Europe. And the response to this in Europe is going to be the Enlightenment. So we're going to define it and discuss the most important pieces of it. So what is the Enlightenment? The Enlightenment usually also includes the scientific revolution. Usually they're seen as kind of a 1-2 punch. Scientific revolution coming first and the Enlightenment coming second. So the scientific revolution is a movement away from using superstition and authority to define life in the natural world, and instead moving back towards the spirit of logic and evidence. So basically it was the sort of natural consequence of Renaissance humanism. So humanism in the Renaissance, this is good for context if you're writing about this stuff. Renaissance humanism was the idea that believing or that using your natural gifted human abilities, both physically, mentally, socially, whatever your talents may be, using those talents was not a sin. In other words, it was not a sin to try to be physically fit and look good. It was not a sin to try to acquire money. It was not a sin to become successful in some earthly endeavor, because these things were seen by humanists as an expression of God's will. In other words, if God did not want you to have the capacity to paint something beautiful, he never would have given humans the capacity to do that. If God didn't want you to focus on your physical appearance, God would never have created the ability of human beings to be attracted to one another, and particularly to classically beautiful human beings. So these were all seen as part of God's plan, whereas in the medieval world, this was seen as sinful. How dare you focus on something like wealth? You have a heaven to get into. You better be focused on spirituality, my man. You're supposed to suffer. That idea goes away in the Renaissance. It really does die off. And the scientific revolution is the natural consequence of that, because after all, if there is in fact a scientific way of looking at the world, that means that I can use those faculties God gave me, the eyes to see, the ears to hear, to observe my natural world and decide, is the church right? Is tradition and superstition actually correct? And can we test those things? And the scientific revolution proved that no, in many cases, tradition and superstition were in fact wrong. Just because the church said the earth is the center of the universe did not make it so, as proven by guys like Kepler, Copernicus, Tycho Brahe, Galileo, and so forth. Now, that naturally rolls into the political world, because if logic says, hey, this may or may not be true, let's test it, well, the Enlightenment says the same thing. So the Enlightenment is the idea, sorry, I spelled it wrong, is the idea that logic, or in the Greek idea, logos being the Greek word for truth, is done or achieved or discovered or whatever through reason and evidence, not through superstition and tradition. And that is where the scientific element of it comes in. So this has to be something that you examine from a logistical perspective, or logic perspective, hence the term logos, where you're going to use your own reason, your own evidence, and if the evidence contradicts what you thought, you change what you thought. Like, that's it. So there are several key Enlightenment thinkers that come up a lot on this test. Again, I'll go back to my original BAM, okay? And you can see for yourself. Oh, not on this list. I have it on another list. Sorry. But you can see for yourself. I'll put up the other list. Well, here's my ChatGPT research from before. I told you, it's not like... Here. Okay. So, Locke, Montesquieu, and Wollstonecraft come up most often in the last 4 exams. So let's take that as like gospel, and let's go with that idea. So if those are the ones who are coming up the most often, let's talk a bit about them. So we got John Locke, the Baron de Montesquieu, which is not his real name, but that's how, I'm pretty sure I spelled that wrong. Close but no cigar. There we go. The Baron of Montesquieu is not actually a baron of anything. It's a pen name, okay? But that's how he's remembered. And then Mary Wollstonecraft, okay? And Mary Wollstonecraft represents a particular type, and she might even be swapped out sometimes for Olympe de Gouges, who will talk about their role both ways. So first off, I happen to think that there is no doubt that John Locke is the kind of beating heart of Enlightenment thought. John Locke is the one that articulates the idea, and this you can use in a lot of essays. So when you write your Enduring Issues essay, anytime you're writing about anything that looks like some human is getting an unfair treatment, whether it's as bad as a genocide or lack of voting rights or any kind of human rights violation or abuse, you should invoke John Locke. So John Locke is the guy who brings up the idea of natural rights. Now, I think, I could be wrong, but I think all of you have read Lord of the Flies by now. Lord of the Flies is an examination of Locke versus Thomas Hobbes versus Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Hobbes and Rousseau do not typically show up on this exam. But John Locke believed in 2 basic ideas, and these are core to the Enlightenment. The first is natural rights. This is everybody has a right to 3 different rights. And by everybody, I mean human beings. Not any creature on planet Earth, but rather human beings. No. You haven't read it. Oh, I don't know what we do then over there in the other department, but you probably should have by now. Whatever. Don't need it for the test. Anyway, your rights are the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to property, not pursuit of happiness. That's what the U.S. changed it to when we wrote our Declaration of Independence, okay? Life, liberty, property. So let's go through these. Life is just what it seems like. It's a right to your personal security, right? Your personal security. So personal safety and security. Liberty is a particularly British concept, and it refers to the idea of free will and self-determination. This is really, really important. It's not quite the same thing as like I have freedom from an oppressor, or I have, this isn't some weird like, sovereign citizen nutcase or something like that. This is not that you don't have a right to be governed. You do, or you have a right to avoid governance. No, government is a thing. John Locke believed in government. We'll talk about that. But he believed that within reasonable bounds, you should not have... I can't answer this thing. Hold on 1 second. Message custom. I'm streaming. What's up? So, sorry. So life, liberty, property. So again, liberty is the idea that you should not have your free will and your self-determination unduly curtailed. And then property is just that. Now, what Locke meant by this is that you have a right. Now, right is critical. We'll talk about the word right in a minute. But you have a right to the fruits of your labors. Now, the actual example is, imagine you plant a tree. Do you have a right to the tree as it grows up? Yes, you created the tree. Do you have a right to the fruit the tree sprouts? Now, you didn't exactly do anything to make that fruit come out. If you planted an apple tree and it made apples, that's got nothing to do with you, really. Do you have a right to the apples? According to Locke, you do. Do you have a right to the shade the tree casts to stay out of the sun? According to Locke, you do. The fruits of your labor are yours. Right? That's important because it's going to feature a lot into the way that, say, for example, the Industrial Revolution will develop and how capitalism develops. These are part of those ideas. Now, what is a right? According to John Locke, the idea of a right was unique and special to humans. Why humans? He felt that humans, either, you could take two ways on this, either by will of God. If you're religious, great. A lot of these men at this time were not really sort of traditionally Christian religion. A lot of them were deists, which is to say they believed in a God. They believed that it was impossible to really know that God, and that their image of God was often something like a master clockmaker. Somebody who sort of sets the pieces in motion, and then from there things kind of grow or spin out from there. So in this particular case, he's not exactly talking about the ideas of the Christian God, but you could read it that way if you want to. So either by God or just by nature. In any case, humans he felt were unique. And what made you unique was that free will element. Like even in traditional Christian theory, a human's free will is something that they have. Even in the face of something like God, a human has free will. This is core Christian belief that God gives people free will, and that allows them to do anything they want to, up to and including defy God. God gives them the power to defy God. And you have to make choices with that. But since you have that ability, that means you're something unique and different. Because a dog doesn't have free will in that same way. What do I mean? Well, can a dog elect to not eat meat? Can a dog elect to stop being a dog? Not really. Not really. Like a dog can't make a conscious decision to stop being a dog. Just on its own will. You can. You could say tonight, right now, this moment, you will never eat meat again. And you can make that decision. A dog is not really capable of that. So whether it's because of our advanced intellect, our big brains, whatever it is, either by dint of nature and just a curious quirk of a human being as smart as they are, or God making it so, you have these rights because you're special. Humans are special. Now, he means every human has these rights. And these rights are inviolate, meaning they cannot be violated. There is no moral way to violate them except where one person's rights come into conflict with another person. The famous sort of example is I want to throw fists everywhere I go. I want to walk in your direction. You have a right not to be punched in the face because you have a right to life and to the security of your person, but I have a right to liberty. My free will says I want to throw punches everywhere I go, and if I want to go right in your direction and I punch you in the face, well, that's too bad for you. Well, who wins there? And the answer is that's where laws and government are made. So Locke comes with the idea that the purpose of government is to defend natural rights and draw laws where rights conflict. That's it. That's all he thought government was meant to do. Draw laws where these lines conflict. So I want a taco, but I don't want to pay for it. You want to make tacos and sell them at a profit. That is a conflict. We need a rule here. And it's not necessarily the case that the rule has to be down the middle. We could decide that my right to the fruits of my labor trump your desire for free tacos. Therefore, you can have a taco if you want to buy it from me. Or you can make your own damn taco. But you don't get to just steal my taco. And that doesn't necessarily have to be the way we draw the line. And we don't draw the line that way with everything. But that is what he felt a Lockean government should run like. One in which government's only job is to defend, secure, and preserve natural rights on the individual level. And draw laws where one person's rights and another person's rights come into conflict. Doesn't mean that everybody has to agree on the laws. It doesn't even mean that these laws need to necessarily be democratic. Just that that's the purpose of the law. That it's drawn to create those barriers where rights are going to conflict. Now, there's one more piece to John Locke's theory. And this is an important piece. He believed that human beings enter into something called the social contract. Now, this, by the way, is something that makes a lot of big Enlightenment thinkers what they are. There's this idea of a social contract. And the social contract is the idea that you will give up some level of your own autonomy in order to have peace and the benefits of cooperation. Now, like what? Well, there's a lot of those, right? So, if we don't have, if I say no, I refuse to give up 1 ounce, 1 inch of my natural rights. If I refuse that, well, then we can't have rights. There's going to be never-ending bloodshed and conflict, right? Because if I say, no, I'm not giving you free tacos, and you go, God damn you, fat man, I want tacos. Well, then the next step is I get a knife and stab you. Like, what else is there going to happen here? Like, we're going to have to come to blows over this. So, a social contract is the idea, no, there are going to be times when you are going to have to give up some of your own personal autonomy and freedom. Yes, you will. And the reason why is because peace preserves the greatest amount of autonomy for everybody. And there are things we can only accomplish in cooperative fashion. Like, only working together can we do this. Whatever it is. You have 24 hours in the day, and you have a very, very, very limited skill set, as do I. I cannot make the technology that allowed me to take this Yeti microphone, this Logitech camera, this widescreen monitor, the OBS software I'm using, the insulated Contigo cup, the protein powder with the matcha green powder. I didn't make any of this. But I was the person who was able to take all these various technologies that are in some cases meant to work together, in some cases not, put them together and deliver to you at home in the comfort of your own home and the comfort of my home an hour worth of instruction. This could have been anything. I could have given you my meatball recipe I made tonight. That would have taken about an hour. Instead, it was instruction. That's a benefit of cooperation. That's only going to happen if everybody involved in creating all the things I just discussed, which we're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of people, over many, 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 many years, layering their technological and methodological inputs one on top of another, right? Like this monitor is the 10,000th iteration of monitor technologies. This microphone is the 10,000th iteration of microphone technologies, and so on, right? Up to and including something as simple as the autofocus on the camera, which I had to shut off, right? Something like that. That stuff is all iterative. This technology has happened over time in space, and as a result, that cooperation has yielded things that no one individual could do, no matter how talented they are. Take the most talented human being on planet Earth. Their actual impact is minuscule without the cooperation of others around them. Now, they might have the best way to organize all these sorts of things and get something really amazing out of it. Sure. But they didn't invent all the stuff that they used to do that. They might be the best organizer of that. They might have the best idea or the best innovation, the best new way of doing something. But they have to come up with that idea. But they still stand on the shoulders of giants, people who have come before they've had to build upon. So that's what Locke was saying, that is the benefit of cooperation. So we have a social contract. That is what we do. Okay, I'm hitting 9 o'clock. I'll give it 5 more minutes. Baron de Montesquieu, a little bit simpler. Baron de Montesquieu always talks about the separation of powers of government, a cornerstone of democracy in any form, where governments have separated powers. Now, I'll spare you the details, but Baron de Montesquieu was actually looking at the British government. He was a Frenchman, and he thought the British government had a proper separation of powers. They didn't. He didn't actually understand the system. America is probably this country with the most clearly defined separation of powers between who gets to execute the law, who gets to write the law, and who gets to adjudicate the law. In our cases, we have an executive branch, legislative branch, and a judicial branch. And their powers do check one another intentionally. Again, to avoid corruption is the idea there. And Wollstonecraft and Olympe de Gouges are always put in there as examples of feminists, or may not be the right term exactly, but women's rights advocates might be the best. Women's rights, there you go, advocates. Women who speak out in the name of women specifically in this Enlightenment era getting the rights that men have and not being left to the side. Now, both of these women are educated, which is important. They're both educated. They're literate. They're not traditional women of medieval Europe, let's say. These are modern women of their hour. Olympe de Gouges is actually killed as part of the French Revolution. She's seen as like a, I don't know, a counter-revolutionary for whatever reason. They cooked up a reason. And then they executed her during the Reign of Terror. But regardless, she wrote the Declaration of the Rights of Women and Citizen as a parallel to the famous Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. And she did it almost like almost a mocking, not mocking, but what's the word I want to use? The word's escaping me, but almost like a way to sarcasm, like a sarcasm of the Declaration of the Rights of Man, where she basically says, yeah, no, not just that, but also women. Yeah, but also women. Yeah, but also women. But some of her ideas are pretty extraordinary. She talks about women's right to divorce men and so on. And she can be pretty, Olympe de Gouges, pretty hardcore. She's pretty OG. So just kind of keep that in mind. But regardless, they're women's rights advocates who argue the idea that in an era of natural rights, women are no less entitled to those rights than men are. And that was their core arguments. Whether it was Wollstonecraft talking about the need to educate women as much as men, or Olympe de Gouges talking about, hey, these freedoms you want to fight for in the French Revolution are just as important to women and should be just as applied to women as to men. So, okay. I gave you a few more minutes there. All right, we're going to call it there. We're going to do another one of these probably over the weekend. I'll put the word out. I'm imagining Sunday evening or something like that. No, I can't do the Sunday evening. Maybe Saturday evening, though I doubt I'll get anybody. Maybe I'll do 2 next week. I don't know about next Wednesday. We'll see. My Wednesday night next week is kind of busy, but we'll see. I'm not giving tax advice on Bitcoin. My advice is to stop gambling on made-up money. There's my advice. I got nothing else. Anyway, thanks, guys. That'll be the end of the stream. I appreciate your time. Hopefully this was helpful to you. And if it wasn't, well, it didn't cost you anything, so you got your money's worth. Adios.